Everybody, thanks again for coming to yet another virtual business summit interview. Today we are talking to Lindsay Stanton, and she is from DigiMe, and we're going to be talking all about employees. So employment branding, onboarding, figuring out the culture for your employees, and we're really going to kind of break it down and figure out all this kind of stuff about it. So without further ado, Lindsay, please tell us who you are, what you do, and a little bit about DigiMe and what we're talking about.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I'm Lindsay Stanton. I'm the president of DigiMe. We are a digital technology company in the HR space. We primarily focus around recruiting and helping organizations to fill positions that are critical to the company, both faster, more efficiently, and at less cost through video. But we also help organizations with onboarding and kind of making sure they're keeping consistency of the process, maximizing efficiency, and communicating the company culture through all steps of the process, because obviously that's super important and probably never been more important than it is in today's climate, trying to attract people. You can't tell the same story the same way that everybody else is. You have to really differentiate yourself and kind of cut through the noise. So that's where we come in to help organizations on a global scale.
Awesome. That was a lot in like in 1 minute. So um, I think the first thing I want to kind of break down is, and it may not be the first thing that you would do, but I think it is personally. So when someone is thinking, I need to fill a position, what are the first things that they should really do?
One of the things I recommend kind of at the start of the process, I guess, most organizations, you probably have some gaps that you may or may not be aware of. So one of the things I always suggest to companies is kind of go through the process yourself as if you were a candidate. Because I think that's one thing a lot of HR functions forget to do and like maybe don't really know where their gaps are. So just understanding, and I realize that, sometimes you have to augment for existing technologies and softwares that may or may not have been your decision to implement, but just kind of going through the process so that you understand where the gaps are and you can use either other technologies or just even high touch methods to be able to try to fill those gaps so the candidate experience is the best you can have.
Absolutely. And I definitely and I'm a big fan of trying to put yourself in the person you're going after's shoes, whether it's going through the process or even if you're in sales and trying to hit a certain demographic, like you got to think like they do.
Mhm.
Um, okay, cool. So identifying those different hurdles and those different places you need to fix in your process. What are some ways that let's say they've identified a few places, but like how do we identify who we're looking for? I think is where I want to kind of go first. Like how do we figure out who is going, like who are we looking for and how to get to them?
Yeah. So I think a couple places, and this will probably get a little bit long-winded because they're important topics, but a couple things I think are really important to when you go through that process, kind of looking at your search engine optimization. So what keywords might somebody be typing in to come across to your positions to begin with, because Google is still the number one place people start their job search. 80% of job seekers, especially passive, are going to be doing their job search initially on Google, and they're going to be doing it while they're at work. So that brings in a couple factors. The data shows they're searching jobs while they're at work. So you need to make sure that everything you're doing is mobile optimized, obviously, and rendering the best to mobile. So certainly if you're incorporating video, there's a high correlation between actually SEO, mobile, and making sure that people are able to digest the content quickly. That's really important. So typing in those keywords and thinking, again, kind of thinking from the candidate's perspective, I think one thing that a lot of us in the HR arena take for granted is we're used to the vendors, the process, the workflow, but candidates aren't. And especially if they have been in the same role for a while and haven't looked for a job for a long time, So kind of stepping back and thinking, if somebody didn't understand that it takes 2 to 4 weeks for somebody to look at their resume, what and where should I be communicating with them along the funnel to keep them engaged? That's super important. We've worked with a lot of organizations to help them overcome a lot of the challenges they've had, especially post-COVID, if you will, with ghosting and challenges in regards to like keeping people in the funnel even after they've accepted the job, like just maintaining that high touch. So if you're using video, for example, to attract candidates, like keeping that consistency of messaging along the way. So, just touching them with a short message, either from hiring manager, recruiter, or even just information about the company and the culture, next steps, the process, like the more high touch, you can keep the engagement. And that doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be time consuming, but because you can do it very automated and develop systems and processes. But the more information you're giving them, the more information that's kind of working on your behalf so that you don't have to start the process over again. So to back up a little bit, SEO is the first thing I would suggest, to kind of making sure that they're, doing a good job of getting people's attention to the jobs in and of itself, just organically. The second piece kind of is a spinoff of that because it's also organic, and that is creating dynamic enough content that your audience is going to want to share it, because there's no better way to reach new talent pools than to make your content so compelling that somebody wants to share it with their network. Because if you're using the right technology partners, you can then like take a look behind the scenes at the data, especially from a social perspective, and see where you can be reaching those people in the future, which is huge.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Hitting the people and being different, as you said, dynamic with your content, like standing out is definitely another difficulty that a lot of people have when there's a lot coming out. All right. So we talked a little bit about where they can go to find these people and what they can do to kind of label where they're going to be, and then also engage them with that content. So now I want to kind of step to that next piece. So like we're in the midst of the hiring process, if you will. We're in the midst of taking applications and all that kind of stuff. What are some best practices, I think, is where I want to go. Like some best practices of like, I'm getting inundated with applications, or I'm kind of trying to interview, like how should we handle that process leading up to those final interviews, let's say?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So let's say you did a great job of using video, attracting talent at the front end. So now you've got an awesome funnel of people. I would say that what you do on the front end matters, because people learn and retain 70% more when they watch a video job ad versus, I always say, reading in air quotes, because I feel like nobody reads anything anymore. Mm-hmm. So you've helped yourself by making sure that they actually understand the requirements before they hit the apply button, which is going to save you a lot of pain when you're weeding through resumes, because it's going to mean that you've got more qualified people. So you've got a qualified candidate pool. Now what, right? So the more high touch you can appear, the better. So one of the things we always recommend to organizations is have an automated, most clients are using an applicant tracking system, or most hiring organizations globally are using some type of applicant tracking system to manage their job postings and their candidate flow. Whether or not you're using one, you could definitely put some of this automation in place without it, but it's just a little bit easier if you do have an applicant tracking system in place. But if you have an ATS in place, one of the things that really makes a difference is to set up an automated email back to the candidates. So once they've applied for the position, they're receiving some type of messaging from you. Best case scenario, you're including some type of informational video in that. So we call it candidate expectation, because that's literally what you're doing, is setting the expectation on the candidate side of what they should expect next. Is it going to be 2 to 4 weeks before they hear something? Is it going to be a telephone screening? Is it going to be a video interview? Are you going to fly them in to do an in-person interview? What does that process look like? And really kind of outline it to them, because one of the key factors that causes ghosting is the unknown, right? And kind of not knowing what to expect, and then like giving up or getting fearful that the organization maybe isn't what you thought, or that maybe you should just stay comfortable and stay where you're at. So you want to cut that off at the pass. Like, you want to make them comfortable and alleviate a lot of that concern while you can, kind of ahead of the game, versus having to then refine new people to fill your pipeline. So some of the things we suggest, kind of keeping that high touch. And if your process is particularly laborious or long, or there's specific nuances that are very different, you definitely want to outline those, because I know it might seem counterintuitive, but actually spelling it out, being authentic and transparent on the front end is going to is going to be a lot better for the candidate experience than them getting surprised along the way.
Absolutely. And that's also going to help you narrow down the field, so you're not wasting your time going through interviews that aren't people who are going to be qualified, because they're like,
Right.
oh, I didn't know that was included, or something like that. So when hiring, you want to be in the mindset of getting the right people and doing everything you can to weed out anybody who's not.
Right.
And the more you can automate that, like you just said, the better, because now you're going to be more efficient. Especially if you only have a short amount of, like a small amount of people doing the hiring process. Or if you even have maybe one of your sales guys handling some of it, you don't want them to be off the phones or whatever they're doing the sales too long. So, very good. Definitely, keeping all that stuff in order. So, all right, let's say that we're now into the final 2 or 3 candidates, and we're heading into the onboarding process, if you will. What are some things that we should keep in mind when we get into that part, and then transferring them into that onboarding process, so that they can start doing that? Like, what are some things that we should have there?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things there is definitely like making sure that they have information about company culture. So, you want to kind of start that onboarding and kind of entrenching them into who you are, like before they actually even start. So we always suggest, and some organizations get a little bit lengthy, a little too lengthy. So just video in general, like shorter the better, pretty much. On the video job description side, like 30 to 60 seconds is kind of best practice. We track duration of view, and candidates will stay on for pretty much the full 20 or full 60 seconds. So you can really communicate like all the key messaging that you want to get across. And it's amazing how much content you can fit into 1 minute of video. So don't get scared. You're not going to be able to communicate all your value prop in a minute, because you definitely can. I think it's something like 1.2 million words that can be communicated in a minute of video content. So it's off the charts. Awesome. The amount of content you can put. When you go into culture and kind of who you are as an organization, you can actually get a little bit longer than that. Candidates will stay engaged. New hires will stay engaged till about the 2-minute, 2.5-minute marker. So a lot of times we see like awesome content that maybe marketing or communications built, but it's like 30 minutes long. So just be super aware that probably the only people that are going to watch that are the people that created it. So you want to make sure that like it is like bite-sized, digestible content. So, but like during that onboarding phase, like, during those transitional periods when somebody's coming into the org, that's a great opportunity to show them, authentic cultural content. And it could be multiple pieces, multiple touch points. Initially you could start with kind of the process and that they should expect. We've even had organizations work with us to kind of create videos around like some of the content that might otherwise be traditional like paperwork, but simplifying it and communicating the to-dos for them before they start in a short video that they can respond to. And then that way too, you know that they opened it, you know they viewed it, like you've seen if they did the call to action on the video. So just things like that, like they again are going to kind of keep that consistency and the high touch. It's actually amazing to me. So probably about 40% of our business is working with global staffing firms and RPOs and some pretty significant brands that you would definitely recognize. And they actually have just as much challenge with being able to manage the workflow and just the sheer volume of candidates, even in a tough market, because like so many people tend to over apply if they aren't sure if they're going to hear back. So adding in a lot of that like automation and just creating more simplicity in the process around like messaging can really help to alleviate the number of people that you have to have like physically manually responding to things, and definitely can lessen the burden on the business. So whether you're like small medium-sized company looking to augment the fact that you don't have an HR specific person, or if you're a big organization and you just don't have the bandwidth to handle the volume that you need right now, regardless, kind of adding those higher touch automated methods into your process can make a huge difference.
Awesome. All right. So we have gotten to the point where we have someone who now is fully aware of what they're getting into, from the different touches and all the content that we've been giving them. And we're now ready to bring them into the company. And I want to kind of step into that facet of now we've picked out our person and we need to get them from they showed up at the door or are working from home and they have their first Zoom, whichever it may be. They have their first contact to getting them over to that training, which isn't necessarily going to be the first thing. How do we, what are some things that we should make sure we're doing in that time? So for example, what are the W-2s, getting them signed up for 1099, like that kind of picture, like what are things we need to make sure we get taken care of so it doesn't interfere with training or interfere with other things that we're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing a lot more organizations kind of handle that on the front end, like both for the person's quote unquote first day, just knock a lot of that stuff out and even just communicate by video, like what's coming their way, what forms and information they can expect to fill out so that all that is done. Again, like you said, either if regardless if they're in person or they're virtual, just having all that done, if it's through like an internal employee portal or just initially sending information via email. Here's what you can expect over the next few days leading into their formal onboarding. Kind of covering a lot of that on the front end really just helps you maximize efficiency, which especially right now when organizations are running so lean, we're definitely seeing that as kind of the strategy is to knock out as much of that paperwork stuff as you possibly can on the front end versus waiting for day one.
Okay. And what are some examples of what that front end stuff might be? Just to kind of put it into perspective. So like I'm kind of come from the prospect of someone who maybe has never hired anybody and they want to make sure they cross everything off their list. So they're not like a day like in the middle of training and be like, crap, they didn't fill that form out. Like what's a general list of like things you definitely need to make sure, even if they don't apply to their company, but like what's a list of some things that they should definitely make sure like take care of these things?
Yeah, I mean, like maybe like 1099, W-9, if they have, if you're using a payroll system, getting them set up in the payroll system. If you have an employee handbook, that's a great opportunity. And that's something that I would recommend, even if you're not a very big organization. And you could probably go on Google and get a template, but just having something in place that outlines because like from a liability perspective, like you definitely want to have that box checked, but just outline like procedurally, what people should expect for like vacation time, for example, or PTO of any type, like sick time, anything like that. You want to kind of have that all laid out so people aren't guessing as to what the process is. And you can set a lot of the kind of foundational elements through the employee handbook. So that's something that's great to send out like right away as soon as you onboard them. But yeah, I think those are the main things. And then obviously any tax documentation that you need to know especially if you're hiring people in like multiple states, you want to capture all that information up front too, and then get them entered into your payroll system.
Absolutely. And that's really good too, the point about setting those expectations. Even when it comes to the training or the first couple of weeks, first couple of months, making sure that everyone's on the same page with what is meant to be happening. And then
Yeah, and if it's
also,
like sales, sorry to interrupt you, but like if
Mhm.
it's like sales or customer support, you also need to take in consideration and have outlined what their like commission structure is and make sure that's standardized so that everybody's getting paid fairly on that front too. But all that should be laid out and clearly communicated to them on the front end.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so we have gone from not knowing anybody and having a position to now we found our person and we have them expectations set and they know what's going on. So the last thing I want to cover before we kind of go into actionable steps or whatever is they have the expectations. you know what what should we set to just have a successful, like, from that point to them working in the company? So examples, training, what's a list of things that we should make sure we're doing to make sure this person stays with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key things I think is definitely lends itself to success is maybe identifying somebody in the organization that can be somewhat of like a mentor for the new person. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's overly burdensome or time consuming for the person that's the mentor to the new hire, but somebody that they can kind of shadow just to understand the ins and outs of the organization and who's who. I think that can be one of the biggest challenges within an organization if somebody's coming in fresh, especially if there's a lot of tenure within the organization, is to even understanding resources and who you go to for what. So that could kind of help that new hire not only get part of the culture and the community quickly, but also make sure they're maximizing their time because they're going to be able to understand resources within the organization and where they should be going. So I think that's definitely a big one. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of organizations do, again, kind of keeping that consistency in the process, is to do short training videos, even if it's just like along the way, or if it's like sales, for example, if there's a certain way that you do things or how you handle like objections from a client, for example, like showing them that way so that they understand before, maybe there's errors or challenges. So some, training videos are definitely important. Anything around like we've had clients who've launched like new technology or equipment. So having staff understand that as well and kind of doing videos like to help them understand that. Key messaging from executives can be really important too, again, to understand like not just the culture, but what kind of what's the party line, right? Like how the organization typically communicates things, because at the end of the day, whether you are hiring a quote unquote salesperson or not, like understanding that everybody on your staff has the capability and probably is going to be in the position at some point of time to function in some way as a sales person or representative of your organization. So helping them, giving them the tools, empowering them with the information, and again, kind of what the organization wants to communicate and how the organization wants to communicate. Because oftentimes what an organization looks like on paper from the outside can be very different from what things are internal. So making sure that you're clear as far as like that messaging goes, that definitely can make a big difference. to the person staying, because otherwise you're going to have to, if you don't retain the person, you're going to have to start the whole process over again. So I think that's really important. And the more high touch you are, like along the entire process, like even once somebody's been in the organization for 5 years, like constant communication and high touch from, and even across different departments can really make the difference, kind of that glue of keeping somebody in the organization.
Absolutely. And so some of the things that I think we've had throughout the entire conversation have been clarity, touching and communicating with them as many times as possible, and making sure that they really understand what they're getting into, and making sure that um, they enjoy what they're doing and enjoy what they're heading into, which comes from all that communication and making it clear what they're getting into. Because like you were saying, when they're you know kind of towards the end still making that decision, being upfront with like what to expect, what's going to happen, and that kind of stuff, so that they can really understand the full scope of things. Because we don't want to get someone all the way through and then they're like, oh, I didn't realize you were doing that, and then they
Yeah.
leave and now you're starting
It's
over, like you said.
extremely, and that costs the organization so much money. Like,
Mhm.
I mean, not just the hiring process, but the training and onboarding is extremely costly. And then that lack of productivity that occurs during that training ramp.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. So before we get into those actionable steps of what someone should do first when they're thinking of doing this hiring and all that kind of stuff, is there anything else that you think we should touch on before we move forward?
I think you covered all the key questions, like as far as like kind of what the pipeline should look like.
Awesome. So now that we've gone through all of this, I want to kind of put out what are some first actionable steps for someone who is in the process of doing this or thinking of starting it. What are the first things that they should do to get themselves rolling?
Yeah, I think one of the first things is really looking at, okay, thinking about what position you have that you want to fill or positions that you want to fill, and like looking at your written job description and really thinking about the persona that you want to hire versus like what it looks like on paper. Because sometimes they're very, very different. And you that gives you an opportunity to kind of weed out like any redundancies in your job description, any irrelevant things, and probably most importantly, identify key areas that might not even be covered in your written job description. It's amazing actually how often organizations written job description is actually a mismatch of versus what they're actually trying to attract. So kind of starting there and just at the job description level, and then use that as an opportunity. So let's say like, oh, well, my, job description is approved by legal and I have to use this specific job description. That's fine. There's plenty of things you can do to work around that. So whether it's adding a video job description to the full job, obviously that's like something I have to plug, like, I mean, but it works because then the candidates can socially share it and actually can take on a life of its own outside of the full written boring job description. So that helps you in a variety of ways: SEO, social, all the things. But if it's just like keywords, so with or without a video job description, making sure that what people are actually going to search in Google is coming up for your job. And because a lot of times it's not. Like we've had clients who said to us like, oh, well, when we're engaging with them, we require this certification, that certification, but we don't have that in our job description because people don't know what that is. Well, yes, but the people who actually could perform the job function do in fact know what it is, and that's exactly who you want coming across your job. So that's every reason why you should have it included in your keywords. So whether or not you have things in your written job description, there's a lot of things you can do with meta tags and keywords with Google that will help you make sure that you're ranking with the right candidates and they're coming across your job when they're doing a search. And then the other thing I would say is putting the power in the hands of the candidates, because if you back to the beginning, what I was mentioning about like having compelling enough content that somebody is sharing it for you, there is no better way to recruit talent than to tap into the talent's networks. So I might be completely satisfied with my position and I'm not interested in making a move, but I might have 10 people in my network who are, and it definitely goes back to the whole like birds of a feather idea. That is absolutely true. And referrals are like typically the number one converting way for organizations to hire. So if you take like an employee referral program and the idea of an employee referral program and you put it on steroids and like pull in social for that and allow candidates that you otherwise wouldn't be reaching to tap into the information about your positions, you've now given yourself a huge multiplier on the amount of reach that you can do. So making sure that your content is socially enabled and that there's a call to action so that they don't get stuck on like, okay, great, I see this position, I want to apply for it, but how do I apply for it? So making sure that you have an apply button, like if you're using video, for example, or any other tool, just making sure that they can actually complete the process, even if that's like augmenting with a light data capture. So you're getting their name, phone number, type of position they're applying for, and years of experience. So again, back to like that simplicity of making sure that the user experience on the candidate side is, kind of meeting their expectations. And let's face it, like the number one way all of us look at content is social. So, it's really, really important. And I think a lot of organizations kind of feel like social can be a little bit of throwing spaghetti against the wall. So if you have the data and the kind of the candidate flow to justify it and see exactly what is converting for you, that can make all the difference, not only for your talent pipeline, but ultimately making sure that you're getting hires and brand exposure at the same time. So huge win-win.
Absolutely. Awesome. All right. So I think we definitely unpacked a lot of stuff in this video, and we have some great actionable steps here at the end. So thank you so much, Lindsay. I really appreciate your time, and I think that everyone watching here can agree that we've definitely gone through the process and really kind of gave some good pieces there. So thanks everybody for watching this video. I really appreciate it, and we will see you all in the networking event tonight at 5:30 Eastern time. Bye, everybody.